In 1998, Julian Cope, musician and former frontman of the psychedelic punk band Teardrop Explodes, published The Modern Antiquarian, a richly detailed guide to around 300 megalithic sites across the British Isles. The book became a bestseller, fueled by Cope's deep fascination with these ancient places and his frustration with the dry, uninspired guidebooks available at the time. More than a straightforward archaeological guide, the Modern Antiquarian is part travelogue, part personal journey. Like the Victorian Romantics, Cope doesn't just explore monuments, he delves into his own evolving connection with the distant past.
I am here in Aberdeenshire visiting recumbent stone circles. You can get the impression that stone monuments across Europe are homogeneous. One stone circle very similar to another stone circle. But they have their own vernacular. To get an idea of how all the different monuments fit together over a 4,000 year period, you need to go time travelling. And for that, I need a ride, and I've left it in Glasgow.
Glasgow's medieval cathedral traces its origins to the first church dedicated to St Mungo over a millennium ago. Most of the current structure dates back to the 12th century, around 800 years ago, with later additions made over time. The Victorian necropolis, built in the 1830s, draws on architectural styles from ancient Greece, Rome, and the medieval period. Glasgow, though a single city, has been shaped by centuries of history. We accept its architectural diversity as a natural reflection of our layered past, yet we often fail to extend the same understanding to the megalithic sites. Time is a dimension, and just as Glasgow reveals its chronology through its buildings, so too do ancient megalithic sites, if we look closely enough.
Well, come on then.
So let's appropriately rewind. Around 10,000 years ago, in what is now Syria and Turkey, our ancestors transitioned from hunter-gatherer to farmers, a shift that transformed humanity forever. Food security and settled life led to population growth, which in turn drove expansion. People set out to find new places to call home. Some of the descendants eventually arrived here, 20 kilometers west of Leipzig, where they farmed and built the gazette circle. We don't know what they called it, nor do we know what language they spoke 7,000 years ago, but we do have the language of architecture. The first colonists who arrived here over 7,000 years ago were part of an ancient tradition of expansion and settlement. Their ancestors had travelled 3,000 kilometres from the cradle of civilization, and they established colonies, farmed the land, and expanded as population growth allowed new groups to break away and start anew. So is this monument the first of its kind, or simply one of the first we've discovered? There are earlier examples further east, and it suggests it was part of an already established tradition. The Gothic circle reflects architectural practices that must have evolved much earlier. The ditch, which is too shallow to be defensive, belongs to a long-standing tradition of enclosing sacred and significant spaces. Its circular form shows the builders knew how to mark out a perfect circle, staking, roping, and measuring the land with precision. The two gateways align with the solstices, midwinter and midsummer. Yet, tracking the seasons and the sun's movement wasn't a discovery of early farmers alone. Their hunter-gatherer ancestors, deeply attuned to the natural world, would have already understood the rhythms of the heavens, whether for following migrating animals, gathering wild plants, or later planting crops. Tracking time has always been essential for survival. Now, travelling across space to what we now know as Portugal, this is the Almendras cromlech, the first stone circle in Europe. The colonists who built it arrived in the Iberian Peninsula by a different route from those who settled in Germany, followed the Mediterranean coastline, and they developed their own distinctive traditions over generations. Here they raised sheep and were skilled agriculturalists, cultivating domesticated peas, beans and wheat. Now, despite the distance from their European counterparts, they too created a space aligned with the rhythms of heaven. A single menhir marks the summer solstice sunrise when viewed from the circle. Another reminder that these ancient people, scattered across vast landscapes, shared a deep need to align their lives with the cycles of the natural world. The efforts required to plan and build these monuments speaks of a people who were no longer wandering, to organise, return and reshape a site over 2,000 years. This was the work of a settled community. This land had become their home. Consider this. Humans have existed for around 300,000 years, and our early ancestors for over 1 million. Yet, for almost all of that time, life was shaped by movement, by the pursuit of game and the changing seasons. These people with the time and stability to create lasting monuments were revolutionaries. The land was no longer just a hunting ground, it was home. The communities in this area flourished, building more stone circles, using naturally occurring granite boulders shaped by wind into egg-like forms. There was no ice age to reach this far south to carve the landscape, but the granite bedrock weathered into sandy, free-draining soils, ideal for cultivation with their primitive plough. And it seemed that this agricultural security would never end. Nearby these monuments lie tombs, the dolmen, and we will see many more on our travels. But here's the thing. The great dolmen of Zambujuru dates from after the local stone circle tradition, though they feel like part of the same culture. Thriving here for 2,000 years, these dolmens were built by a different neolithic tradition, and one with origins further north in Brittany, France. Did the local people adopt new ideas, or were they replaced? Now, certainly about 5,000 years ago, climate change likely strained these early agricultural systems. But whether the population adapted and shifted to more cattle herding and adopting different cultural influences from the north, or whether the monuments mark the arrival of new colonists, remains uncertain. These dolmens in France remain a mystery. Now, they belong to the monumental tradition that stretches all the way from Iberia up to Orkney. Yet modern science struggles to date them accurately, while clearly burial chambers, their deeper significance is elusive. The largest capstone here weighs over 150 tons, requiring the coordinated effort of perhaps 200 people, dragging them slowly into place, and they would have covered no more than a kilometre in a day. Once complete, the entire structure was concealed beneath a mound of earth, a vast communal undertaking, yet often a memorial for the dead, and only used for a limited time. These chambers were hidden, subterranean, enclosed, and secret. In contrast, stone circles and timber sanctuaries were spaces of light, open to the sky. But here the builders shaped a world of shadows, monuments in the earth. Pinpointing when and where the first farmers moved from burying their dead individually is difficult. It seems likely the extraordinarily successful communities in Brittany began constructing these tombs around 6,800 years ago. This dolmen in Brittany showcased building techniques typical of megalithic monuments. Originally, it featured a passage, a row of stones leading to the central chamber, but much of it has not survived. The nearby dolmen of Cacado, estimated to be around 6,800 years old, provides insight into how these structures may have originally appeared. Perched on a hill, its placement raises questions. Was this the place of the dead, central to the living community, or was it set apart? Unfortunately, traces of the villages and farms associated with these tombs have not survived, leaving this relationship open to speculation. Also nearby is St. Michael tumulus, dated again to somewhere between 7,000 and 5,500 years ago. Beneath this massive man-made mound lies a stone cist at its centre. Unusually for tombs of this period, it was not a communal burial. Instead, it housed only a few individuals, and they were accompanied unusually by luxury grave goods, such as jade axes, and these were sourced from the Alps. This indicates the possibility of early elite burials, and marks the tumulus as an oddity in this area and at this time. Approximately 55 kilometres northwest of St. Michael's tumulus lies the cairn of Barnarnez, one of the oldest European structures, dated to around 6,850 years ago. This remarkable site was expanded over an 800-year period and consists of 11 passage tombs built side by side, likely to conserve space and materials. While these tombs share design elements with dolmen, the passages are significantly extended and align with the rising winter solstice sun. The structure's also stepped, almost pyramid-like, and this shape is unique. This place feels like the combination of dolmen construction, with its combination of burial function, celestial alignments, as well as a ceremonial space in front of the monument. Its scale and complexity suggests a society capable of significant coordination and effort, and its longevity speaks of its importance. The dolmen tradition spread with the Neolithic farming communities, and it reached as far as Iberia, Britain, Ireland and Scotland. This building style flourished for 1,000 years, before falling out of favour around 5,000 years ago. Yet Bananas remains exceptional in its design. It combines many elements into a single unified structure. I don't have an answer as to why these unique features emerged here and so early, and why this area produced such distinct and ambitious monuments. But the mystery adds to their enduring allure. Over the next 1,500 years, Neolithic colonists expanded their territory, seeking new lands to farm and communities to establish, and they were very successful. As we've seen, they spread to the south, while others moved through mainland Europe and into Scandinavia. Some of the boldest even ventured across the sea. The distance from Brittany to Cornwall is roughly 300 kilometres. It would be a 4-day journey rowing a dugout canoe, and that's in ideal conditions with favourable weather. Now, scouts and explorers would have mentally mapped the route long before any group of colonists dared to make the crossing. A more accessible route was crossing the Channel, a journey that was only a day's crossing. These two routes seem to have been the spearheads for the Neolithic colonisation of the British Isles, and they brought with them domesticated crops, animals, as well as their building techniques. This site appears to have been inhabited as early as 5,700 years ago. These early farmers constructed their first monuments here, and such structures were sometimes the only monuments erected by the community. It's speculated that this building marked a significant point in a colony's success, with population growth, both from the offspring of the settlers, but also the allure of the region to newcomers. These early communities were able to produce the labour needed to move heavy stones into place. Beyond their functional and ceremonial role, monuments like this symbolise the ownership and territorial assertions of the land by the community. Neolithic colonists likely followed a sea route that led them up into Wales, Ireland and Scotland. In contrast, those arriving across the Channel into Britain faced the challenge of lack of suitable stone. So the megalithic tradition, the big stone tradition, did not take root in these regions. It wasn't until they reached the Marlborough Downs that sarsen stone, a more suitable building material, presented itself at Wayland Smithy, along with the east and west Kennet barrows. We see the evolution of the dolmen into a long barrow, with extended mounds, chambered passageways, and it's aligned to the east. These structures date to around 5,700 years ago, and marked a new stage in tomb construction, a reflection of both architectural ambition and the growing complexity of Neolithic social structures. Here in Wales, in Gower, another site called Giant's Grave, and that's built around 5,850 years ago. It exhibits variations on the dolmen design. Now, the site likely reflects regional adaptations to the available building materials, particularly the lack of large capstones. Now, all across Britain and Ireland, dolmens of various designs and sizes began to appear. Some followed established designs, while others exhibit regional variations, each marking the settlement of bold colonists who sought to carve out a place for themselves in a new land.
So I'm at a 6,000-year-old dolmen tomb, and these were the first buildings of the colonists that came up here. Now what's important and sort of little understood is the summers 6,000 years ago were warmer. It was part of the Holocene maximum, which was immediately after the Ice Age. The temperatures went up in the northern hemisphere, and so the day length was actually a little bit longer, about an hour here when this was built, and the summers were warmer. But the winters were colder. As you can see today, I've come on a cold day, and this would have been covered all those years ago, so my time travelling is a bit off today, obviously. But the Neolithic farmers did really well. So this would have been their, this is a colony on this coast of Wales, and the first thing they did was build this communal tomb, and they only used them for about 100 years.
Within a mere few hundred years of arriving in the British Isles, Neolithic colonists had expanded across the landscape, and around 5,500 years ago, a successful colony was established in the very west of Ireland near Sligo. Now, unlike other settlements where a single dolmen was constructed, perhaps to house the remains of the first generation of colonists, and as a tribute to their achievements, as well as connecting to the ancestors in the other world, this colony created a necropolis. And over the course of 800 years, some 30 or more dolmen were built. This concentration of monuments suggests a shift in how the living and the dead coexisted. Unlike dolmen and other locations, which often seem to be integrated into the community, this necropolis became a distinct place of the dead, and so it likely held some significant ritual or spiritual role, separate from the everyday lives of the settlers. Now, in this region, the local building tradition evolved into the construction of stone cairns. Now, this style closely resembles some of the earliest burials in Brittany. Tomb 51, built around 5,500 years ago, features a small stone cist and was originally covered by a massive stone mound. Unlike many other tombs of its time, Tomb 51 has no courtyard or solar alignments, instead standing as an immense statement in the landscape. And in this way it's similar to St. Michael's tumulus back in Brittany. This truly monumental style of burial is seen again nearby in Maeve's Cairn, perched atop a mountain. It's extraordinary, and it's an unusual structure. Beneath the 10-metre high cairn there lies a passage tomb. Its massive scale and its location suggesting that it served as a significant marker in the landscape. These cairns reflect not only the ambition of the communities who built them, but also the importance of creating enduring monuments that asserted their presence and legacy in the wild and untamed land. Maeve's Cairn, perched high atop a mountain, exemplifies the growing separation between the realms of the dead and the living. While the living toiled in the fields and tended their livestock below, this monumental cairn rose far above them, marking a clear division. This evolution into distinct spaces for the dead is even more evident in the Boyne Valley complex. Constructed 5,000 years ago, the Boyne Valley features 3 monumental tombs, Dowth, Knowth and Newgrange, set within a carefully designed ritual landscape linked by the River Boyne. These structures are far more than tombs. They represent something much greater. The sheer effort required for their construction is staggering. Massive stones weighing up to 10 tons were transported and positioned on site. Beyond this, thousands of tons of quartz crystal, large pebbles sourced from 70 kilometers to the south, were brought to adorn the facade, as well as black volcanic rock, brought from 70 kilometers to the north to add a striking contrast, and it shows a deliberate aesthetic design that extended far beyond mere practicality. Like many earlier passage tombs, these monuments are aligned with the solstice sunrise, underscoring their ceremonial and astronomical significance. They appear to feature courtyards, and they suggest spaces for gatherings and rituals. Now, their use likely went beyond serving as a resting place of the dead, becoming central hubs for ceremonial, social, and religious activities. The intricate artwork found in these sites further emphasizes the sophistication of the communities that built them. The carvings, spirals, lozenges, and other abstract patterns suggest the presence of highly skilled artisans. Such complexity points to an advanced society capable of organizing a large and coordinated workforce. Now, these communities must have included specialists such as designers and architects, and project management, and possibly the help of religious leaders, all working together to achieve some monumental feat. While dolmen continued to be constructed across Europe by smaller communities, none would ever rival the grandeur and sophistication of the Boyne Valley. The first widespread communal construction projects for the living appeared in France around 6,500 years ago, and they appear to have reached Britain about 700 years later. And they are in the form of causeway enclosures. These structures resemble hill forts with a circular or oval bank and ditch, but they are distinct in their design. They feature causeways gaps that render them completely non-defensive. The purpose of these structures seems to have been communal rather than residential. Windmill Hill, constructed 5,800 years ago, exemplifies this type of site. It does not appear to have been a permanent settlement, but instead functioned as a space for seasonal gatherings, feasting, and possibly trade between neighbouring communities. These farming communities were experiencing significant social and economic changes during this period. Agriculture had become well established, allowing populations to grow and create surpluses, and this could support large-scale communal projects. The labour-intensive construction of causeway enclosures highlights the increasing ability of these societies to organise and cooperate, fostering shared cultural and ritual practices. And over the following 1,500 years, the basic design of banks and ditches evolved in regional styles, with some enclosures featuring more elaborate entrances. More than 100 examples of causeway enclosures have been identified across Europe, Britain, and Ireland. The method of digging a ditch and using the spoil to create a bank, often in a circular formation, eventually evolved into what we might describe as the more specialized ceremonial spaces of henge monuments. However, it's difficult to determine whether the activities that took place in causeway enclosures, such as feasting and trading, continued in these henge monuments. The key distinction of a henge is that the ditch is located on the inside of the bank, reversing the out-facing design of early enclosures. The inward orientation suggests a shift in purpose towards activities that were more ritualistic and more exclusive. The Avebury site initially consisted of a high outer bank and an internal ditch, and its stone circles were added several centuries later. The transition from multi-purpose communal spaces like causeway enclosures to specialized ceremonial sites, indicates a growing emphasis on spirituality and the sacred. It also demonstrates the continued significance of communal labour, as the construction of henges would have required considerable effort, skill and coordination. After the henge came the cursus. It was named cursus after the Roman circus route, and they are a complete mystery. They are likely processional, and some of them are absolutely huge. But the earliest, around 5,500 years ago, is here in Karnak. They're enigmatic, they're a mystery. Unlike other megalithic structures, they lack any obvious astronomical alignment, leaving us at a loss as to their true function. Yet their existence is no minor feat, if their purpose was to demonstrate the success of a thriving and highly organized community, one that had tamed the wilderness, mastered farming, and could coordinate monumental efforts, then clearly they succeeded. Like the Portuguese stone circle builders 7,500 years ago, the Karnak builders had an advantage in the abundance of local granite outcrops, making stone readily available. Even so, the sheer scale of these alignments is extraordinary. Some processional routes, including circuses, featured timber palisades, or enclosed spaces, possibly serving a ceremonial purpose. However, these earthworks have largely eroded over a millennia, and it's now primarily visible through aerial photography and crop marks. On the Isle of Arran, a circus dating to the same period stretches over 1 kilometre in length, aligned north to south. The lack of consistency in alignment or size across these sites only deepens this mystery. Close by, on Arran, lies Maclaren, home to 5 Bronze Age stone circles and a central tomb, and they date from 4,000 years ago. One of the circles is in fact a tomb, Fingal's Cauldron, and it includes 2 concentric rings that once surrounded a central burial cyst. And here the stone circles appear to connect to a large processional landscape. Farnborough Henge is a grand hybrid. It is the most monumental surviving example, combining henge and a processional way, dating somewhere between 5,500 and 4,500 years ago. Straddling the Neolithic and the Bronze Ages, everything about Farnborough is on a grand scale. The 3 henges are roughly 240 metres in diameter, and they're connected by a 1.5 kilometre circus. The surviving banks still rise several metres high, and the original ditches must have been impressively deep. Originally the banks were covered with locally mined gypsum, creating a striking white facade. Evidence of post holes suggests that a timber-lined processional avenue also existed, adding further to this ceremonial landscape. Perhaps the most intriguing The unusual dogleg alignment mirrors the 3 stars of Orion's belt, hinting at a connection between the Earth and the heavens. Could other circuses with their mysterious alignments perhaps reflect the Milky Way or other celestial features on nights when the heavens appear to be in harmony with the Earth? And to really stimulate that mystery, the southeast circus points to another henge monument at Nunwick, 7 kilometres away, and then 17 kilometres further on, a row of once 5 stone, now only 4 remain, known as the Devil's Arrows. These marker stones perhaps point the way for an even greater processional pilgrimage, or it was a vast ceremonial landscape. When we think of megaliths, stone circles often come to mind, and Stonehenge is likely the first image that arises, yet Stonehenge is an outlier. The story of stone circles begins not in Brittany or the south of England, but in Orkney, the northernmost outpost of Neolithic Europe. Here the first known stone circle, the stones of Stoness, were erected, making the start of a monumental architectural tradition. By the time these stones were raised, the community in Orkney had already thrived for 500 years. During this period, they developed a distinctive style of architecture, reflected in their house-like communal tombs and settlements. Thanks to the exceptional preservation of sites like Skara Brae, we have a remarkable window into their daily lives. In this Neolithic village, we see homes with central hearths for warmth and cooking, built-in beds for rest, and even a dresser where their most valuable possessions were possibly displayed. Evidence of both practicality and immense pride. Orkney may have been the most northerly colony, but it was not on the fringe. It was vibrant and influential centre. Its monumental creations speak of a society capable of organisation, shared vision, and a profound connection to the land and the skies. The stones of Stoness were not just local achievements, but the seeds of an architectural and ceremonial tradition that would spread far beyond these islands. The stones of Stoness sit within a henge enclosure, though the henge is symbolic in design given the low height of the bank. Unlike Avebury, with its high bank that concealed the activities within, Stoness presents a ceremonial space that is open and on display. The towering slabs of local sandstone form an inclusive structure. And it's from here the heelstone in Stonehenge was transported. This bold architectural innovation quickly caught on, inspiring communities across Britain and Ireland over the next 1,000 years. And as the tradition spread, local variations emerged. Here in Aberdeenshire, the communities with close ties to Orkney devised their own interpretation of the stone circle. I'm back in the recumbent stone circles, where our journey began. These circles differ markedly from the grand collective monuments of Orkney, like Stoness. Instead, they are smaller and more numerous, and there's around 70 examples surviving. Typically, they're about 20 metres in diameter, and these intimate spaces were likely built by smaller communities rather than representing the collective efforts of an entire region. Interestingly, the recumbent stone circle seems to have been influenced not directly by Orkney, but by an earlier local style of tomb. Cairns with passageways aligned to the southern moonrise. Many recumbent circles share their lunar orientation. The farmers on the Isle of Lewis also had close ties with Orkney, and they pursued a monumental and a communal approach to their sacred spaces. At Callanish, constructed 4,900 years ago. The Neolithic builders created a dramatic landscape centered on a stone circle, which was part of an even more ambitious sacred complex of several stone circles. The main circle features radiating avenues of stone, and forming perhaps what we could describe as a processional way. And it's a layout that harkens back to the alignments in Brittany and suggests an ongoing tradition of connection, ritual and movement through the landscape. Canoniche may have been used to mark astronomical events, particularly the 18.6-year lunar cycle. At about the same time, in Pembrokeshire in Wales, a stone circle was constructed using the local bluestone, and that would later travel to Wiltshire to form the centrepiece of Stonehenge. In Cumbria, Castle Rigg was built 5,200 years ago, and it vies for the title of Britain's oldest stone circle. Castle Rigg may have developed independently of Orkney's influence. It's a unique setting, surrounded by a dramatic amphitheatre of fells, and it sets it apart. Unlike other circles, Castle Rigg lacks a henge ditch, and its location feels like a natural meeting place. Personally, I imagine it as a kind of town hall for the local community, with each stone perhaps representing a family or group, and the site serving as a focal point for festivities, seasonal gatherings, and community decision-making. And it's a great place to look at the night sky. Back in Orkney, 500 years after the construction of the Stonehenge Circle, the community undertook an even more ambitious project, the Ring of Rodker. This henged circle, composed of 60 original stones, represents a maturing of the Neolithic architectural tradition. As a time-travelling antiquarian, one of the key points I want to communicate is that while the Neolithic past often feels homogenised, these monuments actually represent a civilization spanning thousands of years, adapting and evolving its art and design and culture as circumstances change. The builders of these stone circles were not static or isolated. They were dynamic, innovative, and responded to environmental, social, and technological challenges. Across Britain and Ireland, there are some 300 stone circles of varying size, shapes, and design. At first glance, they might appear to symbolise a continuous Neolithic farming tradition. But around 4,200 years ago, the climate began to shift. It became cooler, and it was drier, and it's called the 4.2 kiloyear event. And it led to significant changes in agriculture and settlement. Northern communities, particularly those in Orkney and the Hebrides, found it increasingly difficult to grow wheat, forcing it to shift to hardier crops like barley and oats, and alongside a greater reliance on pastoral farming, mainly cattle. Now, at the same time, a wave of migration from Central Europe brought new technologies, including the horse and the bronze sword, heralding the start of the Bronze Age. This influx disrupted Neolithic life and may have introduced new practices, diseases, and even conflict. The architectural traditions of the Neolithic were transformed. Burial practices, in particular, shifted from communal tombs to individual barrows, often containing rich grave goods or urns of cremated ashes. While many ancient stone circles remain in use, Stonehenge itself was expanded during this time. But the great era of megalithic constructions was drawing to a close. Around 3,200 years ago, The Bronze Age had firmly taken hold, and the communal spirit of the Neolithic had given way to a more stratified society. Now, the age of the megalith may be over, but the legacy etched into the landscape endures. Earlier I mentioned Stonehenge is an outlier, a monument like no other. Its story is long and complex. The henge, the bank and ditch, had existed for centuries before the first stones were erected 4,400 years ago. The final phases of Stonehenge construction wasn't completed until 4,200 years ago, during a period of transition as the new Beaker people, part of the broader Bronze Age culture, became dominant in the area. Yet the architects of Stonehenge respected the ancient traditions of the first Neolithic farmers. These traditions, perhaps stretching back 3,000 years, are intricately combined into the monument's design, and it's a nod to the continuity in the face of cultural change, a blending of old and new. What are we to make of the other enigmatic creations of this era? Structures like the Marlborough Mound and the much larger Silbury Hill are astounding. These are massive chalk mounds with no burials, constructed about the same time as the final stages of Stonehenge, and they're on a scale comparable to the smaller pyramids of Egypt. Silbury Hill, for example, required the movement of 250,000 cubic meters of chalk. And now that's an undertaking that would have taken 500 people, 15 years to complete. So why did they build them? Was it a response to the competition? Did the Avery community, less than 25 miles from Stonehenge, create Silbury Hill to assert its relevance in the face of its neighbours' increasingly grandiose stone circle designs? Was it a spiritual endeavour, a colossal act of devotion to perhaps a goddess of fertility, symbolising a pregnant figure created to counteract a changing climate and restore agricultural abundance? Perhaps it was a longing for a golden age when summers were long and the fields were bountiful, a collective attempt to summon divine intervention in uncertain times. Archaeology offers us some clues, but its scope has limits. It can determine dates with reasonable accuracy. It can analyse pollen to reconstruct the vegetation of the time, and it can study livestock remains to reveal what animals were raised and how they might have looked. But when it comes to megalithic monuments like Silbury Hill or Stonehenge, there's mysteries we cannot solve. Without organic material for carbon dating or associated pottery and tools, we can't date it. The motivation behind these colossal undertakings remains elusive. A larger enigma awaits us across Europe. The great standing stones, solitary or paired, are found across Europe from Brittany to Iberia, Scotland to Scandinavia, and some weigh over 100 tons. The largest, the Broken Menhir, originally erected 6,500 years ago, weighs an astonishing 330 tons. What drove people to such extraordinary feats? Were these stones community challenges, attempts to build the biggest, the tallest, or the most enduring structure? Were they waymarkers for a highly mobile civilization? Did they once align with significant astronomical events, or point to sacred centres? Or were they simply an expression of humanity's desire to leave a lasting mark on the world? I think not knowing is part of their power. There will always be gaps in our understanding of the past. Gaps that science, no matter how advanced, may never fill. But perhaps that's a good thing. These mysteries offer fertile ground for imagination. They inspire us to connect with our ancestors, inspire us to go for a walk, in ways that transcend the facts. Megaliths remind us that there is wonder in the unknown, and it's an enduring invitation to dream, to question, and to marvel. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Do like, comment, and subscribe.